Hi there, everyone. Mr. Allen. I'm going to run through the subs practice assignment here. I'm just going to run the program to start so I sort of see what I can see. Now, the first thing to notice is if you downloaded one of the original files, your list box here might not be big enough to display the information. Obviously, you'll want to change that so that you can see what you're supposed to see. Here, when I run understanding subs, I'm going to type in my first number as a 4, second number as a 6. A little message box pops up saying, remember, we shouldn't be printing inside the subs, but if it happens to be helpful for the sake of debugging and figuring out what's wrong, that's a good use of it. After that, we probably don't want to be doing that. And if we look at what sort of says here, can't see too well, but your numbers before the sub are 4 and 6. The numbers in the sub are 4 and 6, so basically it accepts the 4 and the 6 that were typed in just fine. The numbers get changed inside the sub to 666 and 13. And then the numbers after the sub are 4 and 6 again. I'm going to run that again. And this time I'm going to run the understanding by ref instead. And same sort of thing, 4 and 6, same sub. Your numbers are 4 and 6. Inside the sub are 4 and 6. Perfect. Change to 666 and 13. Perfect. And your numbers after the sub are 666 and 13. Now, if we look at these two subs, they are the two that I just ran. The one is called understanding subs. The other is called understanding by ref. And without going through it line by line, you can sort of see that this and this, the work that's actually done inside the sub, is identical in both cases. The only difference between the two, other than the name themselves, is the fact that this says just n1 is integer, and this says by ref n1 is integer. Now, simply, there are two options for how a variable is sent into a sub. One is by value, and that's what happens by default. So if you don't write by value, it just understands that by value is what you're using. The other is by ref. And so the only real difference between by val and by ref is that when I'm using by val, changes that are made inside my sub do not get carried back to the original program. When I'm using by reference, essentially I'm telling the program that I'm allowing you access to the original variables, and if you change them, those changes should be retained. So if we kind of go down to just what's happening here, you can see again that the commands that are being done to call the two subs are identical as well. Input, input, list the number off, understanding subs. So exactly the same commands in both cases here. The only difference between anything down here, or there is no difference, sorry, between anything down here, other than the fact that each one is calling its own sub. The only difference up here is this one has by reference and this one doesn't. But the big difference is in recognizing that this now allows the variables to be changed. The original variables coming in are changed when changes are made inside here. This one here does not. And so your job moving forward will be to figure out, when do I want to be using that by reference and when do I want to just leave it alone as by val? When do I want those values to come back with the changes that were made inside, and when do I want those changes to be dropped? And then after that, basically each of the subs is something you've more or less done before. I won't say you've done it exactly, but you've sort of done something similar. The swap function, basically I'm sending in two numbers, an x and a y value, and your job is to swap them out so that when we get back to the original program, whatever was sent in for x is now stored as the y value, or again, the second variable, because it may not be x's and y's that are being used in the main program. So essentially, I'm taking two numbers coming in, like a 5 and a 6, and I'm sending them back as a 6 and a 5, and I want those changes retained so that whatever those two numbers were that somebody sent me, they've now been swapped. If I run that one at this point, it's the one called trade you, before the sub, so they're sending me a 6 and a 13, and then it says, your values weren't swapped. Did you forget to use by reference? And of course, I did. And so my next job would be to change this to by reference, and then see if this sort of set of commands allows those numbers to come back as 13 and 6. And the program will take care of the fact that it recognizes what the numbers were supposed to be and will tell you whether you've swapped properly. Similarly here, sort 3 numbers. Essentially, your job is to try to rearrange these numbers so that number 1 is the smallest number, number 2 is the second smallest number, and number 3 is the largest number. And right now, this is what it's attempting to do. You'll notice what it wants to do is actually make use of the swap function that works. So of course, you have to make sure the swap function works first. And this basically just says at this point, if the first number is bigger than the second number, then we need to swap those two numbers because we need to have the first number be smaller. And so whatever those two numbers are, no problem. Swap works. It already does that. It changes those two to be in the right order. At that point, number 1 and number 2 will be in the right order, but of course, number 3 may not be, and so it's just continue to get number 3 in the right spot. And again, we want to make sure that whatever comes out of here goes back at the end and is in the right order. So if we run this one, type in your first number, an 8, second number will be a 5, third number will be a 9, and the numbers in order are 8, 5, 9. So you can see that clearly none of them have been shifted from where they were because I didn't yet fix the swap function and because I haven't really worked through the sorting function either. So you have to do those ones in order, obviously, because this one needs to make use of the other one. These next two are pretty straightforward. Set the dice. Essentially, 2 variables are coming in representing 2 dice. You need to make them both legitimate numbers between 1 and 6. And then again, they have to go back so that the numbers can be printed off as you rolled a 3 and a 2 or something along those lines. Yahtzee dice here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dice. So exactly the same code as this, but running 5 dice. And then I believe reduced fraction I suggested for the ICS 3Us only. That doesn't mean you can't try it if you're in one of the other classes. It just means don't worry too much about it, obviously, if you have trouble with it. And it's a reducing fractions. So essentially a numerator and a denominator are sent into you, and then you are trying to figure out how, using mod, hint, 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 you'll change the fraction to be its reduced form. So if I send in a 5 and a 10, you essentially want to send back a 1 and a 2 so that it's in reduced form. If I send in a 9 and a 12, that's the same as 3/4. So you want to send back an n value of 3 and a d value of 4. So again, basically, regardless of what these numbers are coming in, this says basically make sure that d is greater than 0. So if you have a negative denominator, obviously that could be some sort of, or I'm anticipating some sort of a problem. And then you're going to use mod to find the largest number that is divisible to both of those things and somehow reduce the n and the d value accordingly. So we'll stop there. Hopefully that gets you up and running. And then obviously, as you ask questions, we'll see what we can figure out. Good luck.